Welcome, everyone. My name is Misella Dukley, and I am the head of workplace strategy and innovation at Charter. Welcome to the Charter Skills Accelerator on learning culture. For those that don't know, Charter is a future of work media and research company. You can read more about us on charterworks.com, and I encourage you to check out Charter Pro, which is our newly launched subscription for leaders and organizations. We're proud to host the Charter Skills Accelerator, which is a workshop series focused on vital skills that will advance your career and help you lead in concert with your values. It is brought to you free thanks to the generosity of LifeLabs Learning and BrandLive. And before I hand it over to our amazing facilitator, Kevin Knox at LifeLabs Learning to lead the workshop, we'll have a quick message from Sam Holbert-Heil, who is the CEO at BrandLive.
We're thrilled to sponsor this series with LifeLabs Learning and Charter, and hope that it's a shining example of what's possible. Because let's face it, everyone is bored out of their minds with talking heads and little boxes. At BrandLive, we're injecting a little bit of soul into this thing we're calling hybrid work. Whether it's a webinar series like this one, your biggest marquee event of the year, a new hire onboarding series, or your next town hall. We're reinventing how companies and leaders communicate and teaching them to use video so that these moments look and feel like the television and TikToks we're watching outside of work each and every day. Because the key to making sure your audience doesn't tune out is to make it so good they'll tune in. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and thanks for joining us.
That's a wrap. Nice job, everyone.
Thank you, Sam. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Kevin Knox, who is a facilitator lead at LifeLabs Learning. Kevin is somebody who actually is a former colleague and somebody who I deeply admire, and he's going to lead us through learning culture. Just know that Kevin is a wealth of knowledge, an incredible human who is passionate and deeply skilled in supporting people in developing mental skills, performance, and credible self-talk. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Misella, and thank you all. I want to thank BrandLive and Charter for creating space for this event. And I want to thank you who is tuning in and joining us today. I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know what you're in the throes of. I know we're in Q4. It's November 15th. We've got a lot going on. But to carve out space to talk about creating a learning culture, kudos to you. Thanks for being here. A little bit about me, and then we're going to get into the content. So I'm Kevin Knox. As has been mentioned, I'm a facilitator lead with LifeLabs Learning. A little bit about my background, and then we'll get into it. So I've been a facilitator lead, meaning I'm a facilitator of one of many workshops that LifeLabs offers with our partners all around the world. And I also lead a team of folks who are themselves facilitators. I actually work with our EMEA team. And so today I'm going to be talking about creating a learning culture. And I'm not just going to be speaking from this place of concept or conceptual knowledge. I'm actually going to be speaking from this place of experiential knowledge. I lead a team of people who are interested in themselves learning and growing. And I really respect the work of all the folks that are in the call today. Appreciate you being here. Let's get into it. So I was taking some notes as I was seeing those the data there, and the idea that the C-suite individuals' care or consideration for creating learning culture within their organization is equivalent to that of what the C-suite on average concern for DEI 15 years ago. That's a bit shocking. And so today what we're going to talk about are some things that we do and hold high at LifeLabs, and some things that we would nudge you to consider doing and really celebrate within your organization to really accelerate and create as a cultural value, as a standard, as kind of like a belief and even a behavior, a nudging of behavior through creating of systems to help your people, the people that you support, the people in your teams, the people solving the problems you're solving, really demarcate and celebrate the learning and growth that they're experiencing as they solve the problems within your company and organization doing its work. And so I'm going to get right into it here today. There is some interesting research from about 8 years ago now, 2015. And this research basically found that 75% of, companies face a skill shortage. And so this research was in 2015. And basically what that means is they were trying to fill roles and find spots for certain roles that they needed to fill within their organization. And they couldn't find the right skill set for certain jobs or things that they were trying to do. And so what did they do? Well, here we are 7 years later. There was other research done now in 2023, and the needle has not been moved. Actually, Manpower Group has done a survey and some research, and it's actually gone up. Now 77% of employers report difficulty in filling roles. This is a 17-year high. And so you mirror that with, in this beautiful Venn diagram here, with what's happening with employees. 70% of employees are dissatisfied with their growth and development. They feel as if they are not growing and learning. And so today we're here to kind of address this gap, and where the Venn overlaps, we call it LifeLabs the does zone. What are we going to do about this? What are we doing about this? There's some other interesting statistics. They're not on the slide. I'll just name them. Only 20% of employees right now, this is a survey that was done by Qualtrics last year, say they're managed in a motivational way. 88% of employees are relieved when they find out that their manager, their direct manager, is out sick on the day they're out sick. Imagine that kind of work experience. You find relief when the person who you report to isn't in the office or logged in that day. 40% of workers are currently in 2023, in November 2023, considering a job change. And this is of last year, 2022, $30 billion was lost to turnover within organizations. And so what does this problem do? It causes all kinds of other problems. As I show you this list, I'll give you a moment to look at this. We're familiar, unfortunately, with many of these challenges. We know what it is to feel or to witness certain employees or folks being burnt out. We know what it is to experience retention issues, to have teams that are struggling to either work remote or cross-functioning with other teams, given the various challenges of the last many years. This leads to disengagement, underperformance, and we actually don't deliver on what we're trying to deliver on. And so what are the solutions? Here's some traditional solutions that are offered in the space of learning and development, perhaps some things that you've touched on. And we're going to talk about all these today, all of these things. But what I want to actually, before we get into the content, really kind of offer as a reframe is traditionally, and I think of generations perhaps on this call, but definitely generations that came before some of us that are on this call, considered and thought of this idea of growth and development as a sort of a metaphor of a ladder. And what we imagined is that there is this company that we work for, and there is this progress that can be made, and it's pretty sequential. It's laid out for us. The leveling, the idea of what we need to do next to get the next title, to get the next role is pretty laid out. And it was on the company to help us understand how we were to learn and grow. And what we're seeing in the research the last 10 or 15 years is that the better metaphor is not a ladder. It's not as sequential as it once was. Often folks are moving careers or pivoting from a certain domain or type of problem they're solving to a different domain. And what this requires is the skill of a rock climber. I don't know if any of you are rock climbers on the call or have been bouldering. But what's interesting is if you go bouldering, which is just climbing a lower, not as high up and not usually using a rope, what they'll call the climb that you're trying to accomplish, they'll call it a problem. And what we're trying to do in solving these problems is to move our bodies, to shift our weight, to even like down climb or move laterally so as to get to where we want to go. And this is perhaps, I mean, all these things are still applicable, the solutions to all the problems I mentioned before, but the framing really matters. And what I mean by framing is how are our organizations celebrating and inviting people to consider learning and development? How are we, whether we're a startup or a scale up or we're some legacy company, how are we supporting this climb with the systems and the cadences with which we're supporting people's learning and development? And so that's where we're going today. That's what I'm going to be talking about. A little bit about LifeLabs Learning. I don't know if you all are familiar with LifeLabs. LifeLabs is the go-to learning and development company. If you're looking to level up your ICs, your managers, your senior leaders, we offer really efficient, playful, delightful 2-hour training sessions, and we work with companies all around the world. At this point, we've had 400,000 participants in any of our workshops. We have 26 workshops on our current menu, and 2,000 partners we work with across multiple domains and industries. And what we're focused on at LifeLabs, I'm going to actually give you a preview of 3 different workshop offerings, 3 different talking points that we give many different clients to help address this need for skilling up and leveling up the learning in their organization. But as we do this, one thing that we're really focused on at LifeLabs is to help people simplify the complexity of this problem. So I name things like burnout. I name things like, people moving on to another company, or people being unable to navigate the challenges of cross-functional team dynamics. That seems like a big challenge. And yes, it is. But we focus on simple tools, what we call tipping point skills, to help both individuals, managers, and you, folks who are helping support people in all those spaces, understand how to navigate those challenges and apply skills in an appropriate manner to get there quickly. And so that's what I'm gonna do today. I'm gonna talk about some really simple, not simplistic, but simple things to alleviate the complexity of the challenges you may be facing. And if you feel the pressure as I go through this to copiously take notes, feel at ease. We're going to send you not the whole deck, but the key slides and some tools and templates to help support this conversation. Write down what you want. I'm going to ask some questions as we go along. Feel free to jump into the chat. And then also, the goal today and with all of our program offerings is for folks to leave and have immediately applicable skills that they can apply. My aim in the next 30 to 45 minutes with you all is to give you some skills, to give you some framings, to give you some prompts, to be able to get off of this call, off of this this platform here in just a moment, and know exactly what perhaps you should be doing. That's our aim in the time together today. I'm going to start by talking about learning plans, and then we're going to talk about feedback norms, and then we're going to talk about the real power in extracting and really celebrating the extraction of learnings. So let's get started with learning plans. Learning plans, what are we talking about here? Perhaps you have within your organization, you have a cadence of once a year checking in with people and saying, how do you want to grow? Or maybe you're more formulaic with that. You have some sort of template or portal. Maybe it's 15Fi or Monday.com or Culture Amp. You have some sort of system to support said conversations. And what I want to celebrate if you're doing that, or invite you into if you're not, is that when we actually call time to call a timeout, push a pause button, zoom out, and ask people how they want to grow, it actually creates space for them to really demarcate how they are growing. There's really interesting research. Teresa Amabile and her team at the Harvard Business School in the early 2010s were interested in workplace happiness. Basically the opposite of everything we talked about with burnout and people looking to leave and not wanting their manager to be logged in on the call. Like, what leads to workplace happiness? And the way the study worked was her and her team of researchers went into many different organizations. They passed out journals and they said, hey, keep track over a 3-month period when you are happiest in your day-to-day experience of your job. And what they guessed was, their hypothesis was, people would write down the biggest of things. It would be, I landed the big client. We finished the big project push. We, got the big bonus. But it wasn't that. Actually, what they found was 70% of all quote unquote good days and brilliant moments mentioned were indicated by this small feeling of progress. It was demarcating this small incremental growth that led people to feel like and connect the dots of, hey, this job today, this work that I did, it was well worth it. And so what we're talking about today is, really helping you create a culture. And when we're talking about culture, we're talking about shared beliefs. We're talking about creating systems. We're talking about helping nudge people towards certain behaviors. And there are some common mistakes when people think about learning plans. And here are some of the common mistakes. I'll let you read through this briefly. People can feel overwhelmed. Maybe we have too many targets. The tyranny of the urgent, we often switch our focus. Maybe some people are misaligned. They focus on skill development that doesn't correlate or connect with maybe some link ups to the project work they're facing. Maybe you've created a system a year ago and you can blow the dust off of it. Some folks understand the 70-20-10 rule, and it's actually a myth. 70-20-10, basically this idea of 70% of knowledge is attained through action, 20% through peer interaction, and then 10% through formal training. So we just dismiss formal training outright. But in reality, different people have different tendencies. These percentages aren't fixed, and formal learning is worth the investment, even if it's just 10%. And so what can we do? What can we do here? Well, the goal of a learning plan is to demarcate learning, skill development, and growth. What we want to do, and what I'm talking about with demarcation here, is basically handing out a journal to your team and demarcating these small moments of progress. Going back to Teresa Amable's study, helping people, they are growing, they are learning, but helping people have that kind of metacognitive moment where they recognize and see, oh, I have made some gains. Oh, wow, I have done some things in my role. And so the goal of a learning plan is what we call deliberate development. And when we talk about deliberate development, we're talking about choosing where you want to grow, creating a plan for that growth, targeting a specific skill, a specific methodology or method of attaining that skill, and then creating a time frame, and then revisiting how that's gone, 3 to 6 months later. And so when we do this, what we'll do is we will offer people and spend a lot of time. We actually have 3 different workshops where we talk about an individual development plan. And within this, what we'll do, and what I'm really nudging you towards here, is templatizing. If you can create a template or some sort of standard way, and people can iterate how they want, standard way to hold the conversation, you're actually creating space to measure something. And what gets measured often gets done. And so if you look here, I'm just going to invite you to take a moment and read this, and I'll guide us through it. I'll give you a whole workshop in 2 minutes. But at this individual development plan, what we see best practice with our partners around the world is that folks will create space either once every 6 to 12 weeks to have conversations with their direct managers. And what they'll do is they'll identify where do or how do I want to grow. And so when you think of the time frame, usually it's best practice would be once a quarter, if not twice a year. And then you target an area, and then you try to have that. If you think of a Venn diagram, I want to grow here, and the company has needs here, where those two things overlap, that's the skill you focus on. And then we argue that it's really important for you to ask, where are you currently at? That fourth row down there says, my current level is on a scale of 1 to 10. A scaling question is completely subjective, but it does create a sense of like placement in a subjective experience. So it takes this philosophical and makes it more textile, makes it more granular. So if you're a 6 out of 10, and the skill that I want to get better at is making my meeting agendas, I'm a 6 out of 10. Well, the question then for the next 6 to 12 weeks is, how can I move to a 7 out of 10? It's not how do I get to 10 out of 10 or a 12 out of 10 or how do I crush it? No, it's like, how do I just incrementally move up? And then with these 3 E's you see here, education, experience, and exposure, we ask people to consider, if they were to create a plan and just check in on it maybe once a week, do something once every 2 weeks towards getting to that 1 point or 10% increase, what might they do in each one? Education is the default way we grow in any way in the West. It's workshops, it's TED Talks, it's reading books, it's going to conferences. Experience is asking to get on that project that maybe not as explicitly your role, but you'll be able to practice some of those skills that you want to grow into. And then exposure is finding someone who is good at the thing that you're hoping to get good at. Someone who already, behaves in a way or has a skill set that you're trying to attain, and then asking for time with them, to interview them, to shadow them, maybe to ask them, would you mentor me for a season? And then we create an action plan and we check in on it. Now, as we do this, I just invite you, just for a moment, I want you to consider, if you right now were to take 30 seconds and bring to mind, where do you want to grow? And in terms of ideas, it could be, I want to become a better meeting leader. I want to get better at cross-functional teamwork. I want to be a better feedback giver. I think it'd be great if I was more clear about what I even wanted in my career. And so you just want to do the work of being aware of, how might I want to grow? How can I equip my teams to celebrate and support learning and development? I don't know. What is it you want to improve on? Give you a moment to think about that. And now I want you to answer this question. What would you score yourself in terms of the scaling question on 1 to 10, 1 being you're not great at this, 10 being you're crushing it? What would you subjectively, what would you score yourself? Are you a 4 out of 10? Are you a 6 out of 10? Are you an 8 out of 10? Now, if I asked you, what would you do to get 10% better in the next 3 months, either through learning, through experience, or through interviewing someone who's good at this, what ideas might you come up with? Now, I'm not going to be able to go back and forth and have a reciprocity conversation in this moment, but imagine having this conversation once a quarter with your direct boss for a whole one-on-one, for a whole hour, hour and a half session where you zoom out and you check in. And these learning plans actually do a great job of helping people. They create the scaffolding or the system to help people do the work. Again, what gets measured is what gets done. And so that's just a taste of what it is that we might be doing in really elevating and supporting people. When you create templates and you create systems to support conversations, usually those conversations happen. And so we want to really nudge you if you're struggling with burnout, if you're struggling with, man, folks aren't noticing where they're growing and learning, create space for, and we would nudge you to consider a learning plan. That's the first thing to consider. The second thing to consider, and another component of establishing a great learning culture, is establishing feedback norms. So feedback skills is one of our products. It's one of our product offerings. It's a workshop we teach, facilitate, offer our partners. And it's our number one selling product. Why is this our number one selling product? Because companies are not good at this. Because we do not know what it is to give each other feedback, not in the spirit of, I want to critique you, or I just want to shout you out because I think you're better than everyone here. No, because I want to actually demarcate where we're growing and where we have room for growth. I care about you enough to give you feedback as to where I think you might get 10% better. And so when we talk about feedback norms, there's a few different things we really want to mention here. And the first thing is, why is this a challenge? Why is this our number one selling product? The first thing I'll mention is the brain. And let's just talk about the brain for a moment. All of us on the call, myself included, have a really strong negativity bias. You can't help it. And it sounds bad because it's called a negativity bias, but it actually keeps us alive. It makes us aware of potential threats, right? You step into a certain environment and you ask, am I safe here? Even in the acute projects or teams you serve on, you're asking, do I belong here? Is this a place where I can show up and offer my creativity? Folks, even on this call, and some of you are doing it now, you logged in, you saw the intro video, Marcella with such a brilliant intro, and the Brand Life CEO intro, and then you hear me and you think, who is this guy, right? What does he have to say to me? And what your brain, you may not be saying that explicitly, but even subconsciously, your brain is assessing, is this something that is threatening, or is there something for me to take away? And so when we do this workshop, we really establish, we want to help folks give really brain-friendly messages of feedback to help folks not get defensive, not start thinking from their limbic system, but rather really stay engaged in the conversation. And what we have highlighted on this slide right here, if you see that little red dot in the middle of this person, this image's brain here, that red dot is highlighting the amygdala. And the amygdala is what's known as, casually anyway, the fear center of the brain. And when we feel threatened, physiologically, the amygdala actually gets larger. And when we feel threatened, what happens is we start processing what's happening in the limbic system. The limbic system is the more primitive part of all of our brains. It's responsible for things for like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. This is where you're talking to someone and they've stopped listening. They're just waiting to speak so they can defend themselves. Or you're trying to have a strategic conversation and someone's not engaged with it because they feel threatened and they're still, hooked on the thing you said that was threatening to them. And so when we have feedback conversations, we actually want to engage the neocortex. This is the most evolved part of all of our brains, responsible for things like language formation, learning, strategic thought. Now let's zoom out. Why am I talking about this? One thing that doesn't allow and disallows creating a learning culture within your organization is individuals within your organization walk around with enlarged amygdalas. Whether it's the macroeconomic environment or it's the lack of clarity around what their role is or how they're growing, folks have and feel threatened, unsafe. They lack psychological safety, necessary trust between their team members. And so how do we actually help elevate this? Well, some common things that people try or reasons why this is not really held high are on the screen here. The one that I'll name here is this. It may not be as bold or as big as hold and explode effect, but organizations that don't do a good job of regularly giving and receiving feedback, they wait. And they wait until the tipping point where, oh snap, everything's up in the air. I have to say something to you. Or they wait for the annual or semi-annual job performance review and everyone gets surprised. Wait a minute, that happened then. Why didn't you tell me then? And what we know about the brain and the amygdala and surprise, anytime you're surprised, that amygdala is going to heighten, it's going to feel threatened, and they're not going to take what you want to share in the framing that perhaps you want to share it. And so what can we do? Well, we want to elevate a feedback culture. Now, when we talk about culture, I mentioned beliefs, values. I talk about behaviors, things that we want to do to introduce. This is the norm here at this organization. It involves role modeling. It involves creating frameworks, and it involves helping people have a common vocabulary. So let's talk about that. What can we do to help people with these things? One thing that we talk about in the feedback skills workshop, I want to introduce to you now, and it's basically a framework to get at what's really helpful to help people not get their amygdala engaged and to know what to do with the feedback you're giving. And we call it the LifeLabs playing cards method. And what we're doing here is we've taken a deck of playing cards, and we've taken the 4 suits in that deck of playing cards, and we've likened it to the 4 kinds of feedback that are typically given among teams, among individuals, on projects, etc. What are those 4 kinds of feedback? Well, we have clubs, hearts, spades, and diamonds. What is a club and what is a heart? I'll start here because there's really 2 kinds of feedback. There's a critique. I see something that needs specific feedback. I want you to change your behavior or alter the way in which you're showing up. Or I want to give you a praise. A praise is, I see something you're doing well. Keep doing that. Double down that behavior. I want you to repeat doing that because it's leading to this result. Well, when we give this feedback, the most brain-friendly way to do it is to be as specific as possible. And at LifeLabs, we talk often about blur words. Blur words are these common words that we use in work speak, words like strategic or culture fit or tone. You know, we use words that mean something, but if you have 2 different people in the room, they might mean 2 different things to those 2 different people. And so when we give feedback, we want to be as specific as we can. That's what we're talking about with blurry and specific. Why is a club called a blurry critique? Well, because when you get a blurry critique, it often feels like you're getting hit upside the head with a club. Here's an example of a club. I don't think you handled that situation with the client well. It's like, ouch. Okay. I thought I did. What are you talking about? Like, no, I think I did. I don't think you're right there. And what's lacking here is the specificity of what actually led to this conclusion. And so what we want to do is we'd want to invite people to recognize, hey, a club was just given. Can you turn that club into a spade? And so what specifically don't you like or didn't you like about the situation with the client? This is one way we spend a lot of time in that workshop talking about how to receive feedback that's not given well. And again, when we do this, either as managers, individual contributors, or senior leaders, it actually is a signal setting action. This is the norm. This is what we're going to do. And so we take that spade and we make it more clear. Why is it a spade? We think of like a garden spade, which is really sharp. It allows us to get right to the root of an issue. I want to give a specific critique. So those are clubs and spades. Let me give you an example of a heart. So what is a heart here? A heart is, hey, I love that presentation. Great job. You crushed it. That feels so good. In fact, I hope you all have a kudos channel on Slack or Teams where you're giving high fives and you're shouting people out. But I would actually categorically say when you are blurry in your praise, you are just giving people a high five. It's in that domain or category of encouragement. But if you really want to skill up people, if you want to demarcate progress, if you have a situation where you're onboarding someone or you're training someone for a new position and you really want to help people understand what did they do well because you want them to keep doing those steps, those behaviors, that specific thing, then turn that heart into a diamond. What was it about this presentation that you loved? Because I'm giving the presentation 3 more times, I want to make sure that I do that thing that you love so that I have the same impact that you mentioned. And so this is just one way in which we celebrate, and I would nudge all of you on the call, do you have a common vocabulary for giving feedback? Do you have a common vocabulary for helping people understand how to navigate the individual amygdala, but really at a team level, how do we help people not get defensive? How do we help stay focused on the task at hand or the demonstrative behavior that needs some adjustment or is something we want to nudge people to keep doing? Some other common things we talk about in that workshop, some feedback norms that are really, really important. One is to avoid what's known as triangulation. I mentioned this briefly because many of us on this call, many of us here today, our companies practice 360 or forms of 360 feedback, where at the end of the year, various anonymous team members have said things about me and I get themes or I get, I get feedback from someone that says, hey, Kevin's generally speaking this kind of way. And it's not specific enough to help me know what to do differently or to change. And it might trigger the amygdala. Another classic example is if you're a manager and I see something that I did, maybe I'm in a direct report, I see something that happened, but I don't want to give the report, my colleagues the feedback directly. So I go to my manager and I say, hey, can you give feedback to this person? They did this. We want to go directly to the source so as to really support the amygdala, not hijacking the conversation and sending all of that to this defensive part of the brain. And then lastly, we really do talk a lot about, and I would nudge you all as well, one way that you can elevate feedback. And again, zooming out, why are we talking about feedback? So that we can demarcate progress, so that we can celebrate and encourage people's growth, so that we can learn. Is to celebrate, we call it Feedback Fridays, but it's basically creating org-wide cadences, whether it be every week or once a month, where you invite all teams at all levels to pay attention to what feedback should we be giving. What thing can we do to help nudge people to keep doing what they're doing well, or to improve, or see where perhaps they might have a 10% improvement opportunity. So that's feedback norms. And I will name, I am freaking monologuing. I'm on a stage. I get it. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, there's a little Q&A spot. You can drop it into the chat. That'll be pushed to me and I'll address those. I've got about 10 more minutes, 15 more minutes of talking about learning extractions, just briefly. And then I'll take your questions and we'll talk about it together. So the third component, a great important component of really establishing and celebrating a learning culture, is what we call learning extractions. And again, I want to draw our attention to the brain as I talk about learning extractions. And so what you see here, actually, I don't know who's looking at the slides. Can you actually take away me and just show this whole slide? Is that possible? And get my face away so that we can just zoom in here. And if not, if it's too late, I should have told you that at the beginning, my bad. What we're looking at here is an image of trace neurons and a neural pathway. You have 4 different neural pathways and 4 different levels of neuron myelination. All right, Kevin, slow down, back up. That's too much vocabulary. Let me explain what you're seeing here. All right, I'm going to start with a little example. Can everyone here, and I'll do it with us, can everyone just cross your arms? Can everyone fold your arms? I'm folding my arms here. I'm going to stand up into the frame. So I'm just folding my arms. Can everybody fold their arms for me? Well done. Well done. Everybody's got their arms folded. Now I'm going to ask you, this is going to be challenging, I think. I'm going to ask you to unfold your arms and fold them the opposite way. So however you folded your arms, do it a different way now. I can't see you all, but I know many of you are doing this. What is happening here, right? And so that's really different. And what just happened was, when I asked you to fold your arms, on the far right of the slide here, where you see all those lines and those little dots, these trace neurons have taken that neural pathway. You tell yourself, I need to fold my arms, I need to cross my arms. Your brain knows exactly how to do it because you've done it 10,000 times. These trace neurons have taken this path so often, there's many different options, many different highways and roadways to get from one side of the synapse to the other. But then when I ask you, hey, unfold your arms and fold it the opposite way, you've never done that. You don't do that. So you have to be really deliberate about doing that. And so what you're seeing then, experiencing then, is more what's happening on the left side here with the trace neurons that actually have no highway. They're literally myelinating or creating a path by taking that path for the first time. That's an example. What are we talking about? Why are you talking about this within the context of learning extraction? So we all just learned something. Now, you may not know that you learned something because you just did it and it was uncomfortable, but I asked you to cross your arms. I asked you to uncross your arms and cross them the opposite way. And if I were to ask you, what did you do to cross them the opposite way? You might actually be able to demarcate and see there's some steps that it takes to cross your arms the unnatural or the opposite way that you tend to cross your arms. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. When I cross my arms, I grab my right bicep with my left hand, and I take my right hand and I tuck it under my left bicep. I'm extracting what I do. I don't know that I did that, but I actually, looking at it, that's what I'm doing. I'm grabbing this bicep and I've tucked my hand under that arm. In order to cross my arms the opposite way, I'm just going to do the opposite. I'm going to take my right hand, grab my left bicep, and I'm going to tuck my left hand underneath my arm. Now, even naming that and those steps, it's easier for me to do. It still feels a bit unnatural, but the fact that I named the progress of how I did that, you now perhaps know how to do it. And if I had to do it in the future, because I've written down the steps, I don't have to do all the clunky, what's happening here. I've extracted the learning. Learning extractions demarcate the steps necessary to obtain a new skill, navigate a new domain. And really, they reduce the cognitive load, all the like, what's happening, the guesswork for yourself and others the next time you face such circumstances. And so some common mistakes when we talk about learning extractions is we give people learning and development budgets and they go off and learn something and they never tell anybody about it. Or we have a learning and development month. We have workshops, and then the very next thing we do is we move right back into project work. And you heard the thing, but cognitively you don't remember it because we don't remember conceptual knowledge unless we practice it. And then it's lost. Or the missed protege effect is we never put people in a position where they have to teach. And don't you know this? Any of you who've had to teach a workshop or teach a class or instruct anybody on anything, don't you learn it better by being put in a position where you have to teach others? This is the protege effect. And so learning extractions, company-wide, best practice that we see here is when we give people a chance to learn, we invite them to actually extract what they've learned and share it with the team. And so if I have a budget at LifeLabs as an example to go do a learning, I actually did this recently. I'm a parent of 3, and I went to this professionals with kids at home playbook thing, and I went to this workshop, this conference thing. And when I got the budget for it, the only agreement that I had was, okay, now if you're going to get this budget, I need to come back to LifeLabs and do a skill up around it. What did I learn? Extract it for the team and then share it out. Can I tell you that I learned some when I was at the conference, but I learned a lot when I was forced and put into a position when I had to teach others. And then the team also shared in the learning by way of that extraction. And so this is what we're wanting to nudge you to. As you celebrate learning and development, as perhaps you invite people, as you yourself, like, what are you learning in this workshop? What are you learning in this event today? What can you take back to your people? My challenge to you would be, what extraction is here? Share it with somebody. Teach some of this to somebody. Do you remember what we covered? We talked about templates and having a learning plan. We talked about feedback and being specific. Now we're talking about extracting learning. What might you do to extract that learning and share it with others? This is one way that we really do elevate. The goal being, right, helping people recognize they're demarcating, I'm learning, I'm growing in my role. Because we just don't stop to see and experience it. And so here's some ways in which 3 questions you can commonly ask. We frequently ask at LifeLabs. And we have an R&D department. We're trying a new workshop offering out, or we've taken a risk with a new team, or we've tried something new. We'll extract the learning. What did we learn? Or maybe we're doing a retro on a project and things didn't go well and we're wanting to feel down about it. Well, it might have been a wreck, but hopefully there's some treasure in that wreckage. What might we extract in terms of things we might not do next time or might want to consider doing next time? And then when can we apply it? These learnings that we have, when might we put them in place next time? And so, we organize this in terms of a systemic way and doing retros on projects, having learnouts, doing skill ups, really creating space to pause. Again, I'm talking about cadence. What can we as people in people ops or learning and development, how might we nudge people to really do this, create it and build it into the rhythm of how your team operates on an annual calendar basis, at least once a year, if not quarterly, twice a year, building in these pause points to really allow people to extract what's happening, to pull those journals out, to write down, I am growing and learning. Let me share it with you. And so your learning extraction. We've covered a lot of ground today. I've spoken a lot. I really appreciate your attention. I'm wondering what questions might we have, or what learning extractions do you have that you want to just hold high? I'm going to pause now, and I'm not going to go to that slide just yet, but I'm going to pause now and look at the chat and see if there is anything for me to speak to. I'll give you a moment of thinking time. If you have a question about anything that we've covered or a comment about your experience in your organization, please drop it in the chat and it'll be pushed to me. I appreciate it. No questions at this time. Well, I appreciate your attention. I appreciate you. Can you give some more examples of feedback sentences? How can we bring senior stakeholders on board to operating and investing in this new way? Okay, here they come. The visuals were perfect. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it, Zach. So let's start with Jelena. Can you give some more examples of feedback sentences? Yes. In that workshop, feedback skills, we actually invite people, and the best way to perhaps learn anything, we just mentioned this, was to put yourself in a position where you actually have to do it. And so we, in the workshop, we will ask people, what's a scenario for which you need to give feedback that's real time? Like you need to give feedback to a colleague, or you need to give feedback to a team member, a collaborator on a project, or maybe you've recently given some feedback and you'd like to rethink, how might I have said that differently? And the elements that we focus on in that workshop, there's a bunch of them, but I'll just highlight 3. We want to be specific. What's the behavior that we noticed? Maybe someone's tone has been off, or someone's been cutting people off in brainstorming meetings. What you wouldn't want to say is like, hey, you're really rude in these meetings. It's not specific. Rude is a blur word. It's going to trigger that person's amygdala. So what we want to say is, hey, when Kathy was sharing, she didn't get to complete her thought. You began speaking, and then we never turned to Kathy. You did the same thing with Tom and with Alex. I'm being very specific. That's completely objective. The person can't disagree. Once I'm specific, I want to tie that to its impact. Now, the impact portion is really the other side of the coin. Why are you bringing this up to me? Why should I care? The impact statement is what is the negative, or if it's a praise, the positive impact that behavior is having on the product, the project, the team, our culture. And then from there, once you name the impact, you want to ask a question. Giving feedback, and it's unfortunate that I say, I don't think that we should give feedback in a one-way manner. We shouldn't, and unfortunately, a lot of like parties and organizations and like whole systems are built to give written feedback. The gap of written feedback is there's no reciprocity of discussion. And so the last element we really hold high is you want to ask a question to the person you're giving the feedback to. What was going on for you in that brainstorming meeting? Or what can we do to create space for Kathy, for Alex, and I forget who else's name I made up, Tom, to speak. When I ask these questions, I create a monologue and make it a dialogue. How can we bring senior stakeholders on board to operating, investing in this new way of thinking? Verona, great question. I would go back to some of the opening hooks for you all during this presentation. In terms of return on investment for learning and development, and turn on the climate we find ourselves in, either the macroeconomic climate or the acute climate of people moving from job to job, not being able to hire for skill set. Those things are a big financial incentive to help people pay attention to learning and development. I would also identify, is there something that your team is like a felt pain that's having serious impact on your ability or inability to do something, to hire for roles? Use that anecdote as further proof of concept. Hey, we should be developing and supporting people. And again, after this workshop, Veronica and everyone, you're not just going to get the key slides. You're going to get some, anything I quoted in terms of research. You'll get Teresa Moblay's research. You can send folks whatever they need to further prove the point. This is worth the investment. Yeah, an example of a specific critique, specific praise. I gave a specific critique, an example of a specific praise. I loved your summary on Project XYZ because it was a one-pager and you had action items for everybody who wasn't in the meeting, and we knew exactly what to do. This person's tasked with writing summaries, maybe. They know to keep it brief and create action items. Bella says, what advice do you have for aligning desired experiences and exposures with the pace of the business? There doesn't always seem to be time to upskill. Yeah, this is where, and I really appreciate it. I call, there's a lot of urgent and ad hoc work that kind of robs us of the day. I call it the tyranny of the urgent, right? And if we don't create space, we will never pause. Again, what gets measured gets done. And this is why we talk about cadences, why we talk about rhythms, why we talk about, don't just have the once a year, sit down with your manager, zoom out, talk about your job. Make it quarterly. Make it a theme. Make February, June, and August learning and development months, where we're going to call timeout company-wide. We're going to ask all managers to take an hour. The more that you can celebrate it, and everybody knows that everybody's creating space to do this, the more that it will actually get done. Now, there's a lot of other ideas, but that's the biggest one. Organizations that can get their senior leaders on board with at least once a quarter having a zoom out conversation about what people want to do to grow and develop, and then following that on with the extraction of the learnings that people are having. That will give a robust, oh, wow, the urgent is important, but there's other things that are important too. And sometimes they're not as urgent that we need to create space for. Can we share more about the myth of the 70-20-10? I sure can. So the 70-20-10 is basically, when I showed the 3 E's, education, experience, and exposure. If you flip those around, there's a lot of research to suggest the way in which we gain any kind of skill is through practice, is through that second E, which is experience. And then other folks, the research also, like broadly speaking, 20% is through peer interaction, is through being around someone who's really good at something, or working for a company that does something that is in a skill set or domain you want to gain a knowledge in. And then actually we only gain the skill through 10%, broad strokes speaking anyway, through formal training. And so folks use that 70-20-10 rule, as they say, as a reason to not invest in learning and development. Well, it's a myth because different people have different tendencies. And at different stages in your career, particularly when you're new to a company, new to a domain, or never been on a certain project, it isn't 70-20-10. The research suggests there's a lot more formal learning. There's a lot more peer interaction and a lot less practical, like cutting your teeth. You actually have to gain some conceptual knowledge. And then also the percentages aren't fixed for different people. Different people have different tendencies, different preferences. And so it's really worth even if it is just 10%, it's worth the investment. I don't know if that speaks to what you're talking about, but yeah, true beginner, advanced beginner. Yeah, different stages of your whatever knowledge base you have in a certain skill set, the relationship to that ratio is different. I'm working with another company using Culture Amp, but managers have had a difficult time curating, streamlining the LifeLabs content available to create targeted learning plans. Zach, my question would be, and I don't know if there can be a back and forth between you and I, but is it the tool? Is it Culture Amp? Is it the creating space for people to watch some recorded content, right? Or is it people in your organization have been through some workshops and you're trying to use Culture Amp as a template and people aren't doing it? I will say this, the adoption of a new template is a change. And it's not that people don't like Culture Amp. It's not that people don't like the learning plan that you've created. People don't resist change. People resist being changed. And so you almost have to change the incentive or the narrative as to what Culture Amp does and why we're doing it now. And so you think through, like, what is it that's going to incentivize people? Whatever the old rhythm was or the old cadence was, why Culture Amp and why now? And this is really the power of storytelling. I don't want to get too loosey-goosey, but when I talk about cognitive psychology, I didn't mention this, but my background is actually in acute sports psychology. I've worked in organizational psychology for a long time, but I work with athletes. And I work with coaches at the highest levels. And when I do this what I call mental skills training, or kind of assessing the narratives around things that they have resistance toward, really, if you can change the story, you can change the behavior. And so why Culture Amp? Why now? Another way to say this is the stories we celebrate shape the culture we live in. And so if you want a culture of Culture Amp, and if you want a culture of learning plans and following this template, then tell a better story. How might we incentivize? This is why it's worth it. You can speak to their head, you can speak to their heart, but definitely talk about why this transition now. Yeah, the content library is so dense and so great. Yeah. Well, team, I want to thank you all so much. I don't see any other questions. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate you being here. And if you want any of the content, you can go to lifelabslearning.com. We have now many different options for a workshop. We have now a membership, and there's 3 different tiers to our membership where you can just log in, and it's not like a recorded video of a workshop. There's live facilitators ready to lead your team through trainings at your pace, on your time. But you go to lifelabslearning.com to look at all of that. Thank you so much for being here. And I think I'm passing this back to Marcella.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin. I promised you all that he is brilliant, and I am sure that you learned a lot because I absolutely did as well. I also want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today and participating so actively. Those were amazing questions. I would say that one of the things that really stood out to me about this course, this workshop, and in thinking about impact is just intentionality. Kevin talked about the intentionality behind being deliberate in the development itself, like really having a set plan, deliberate in how we actually give feedback to one another so that it's useful and it doesn't just sort of land either in a hurtful way or learn in a like, okay, that's great, but not something that I know what to do with. And then deliberate in that learning extraction. And so I encourage you all to leave here today and think about what you have learned. Like, what are you extracting? What's the thing that you want to practice? Beyond that, please do remember to fill out the feedback survey that's coming right up. We really take your input very seriously. And before we close, I want to thank you for following along with the Charter Skills Accelerator with LifeLabs Learning this year. And if you've enjoyed today and you missed any past sessions, you can view them on BrandLive as well via the link that will be shared in the chat. Thank you to Kevin at LifeLabs Learning and to Sam and the team at BrandLive. See you next time.